When you really break it down, the whole history of the NBA is still a relatively short amount of time.
At 79 years old, there are still many people around who have a living memory of the first NBA season.
The league celebrated 50 years in 1996 with a special reveal of the top 50 players of all time up to that point, as voted on by media, former player, general managers, and other notable figures.
For the first 50 years of the league, there were several individuals who were obvious locks to make the top 50. Michael, Kareem, Larry, Dr. J, and many others easily made the list.
But what if we told you that a 9-time All-Star who at that time sat 8th on the NBA's all-time scoring list did not make the top 50?
In today's episode, we take the NBA time machine back to the 80s and 90s and explore the life and times of one of basketball's most underrated players of all time, the one and only Dominique Wilkins.
This is Once Upon a Dribble.
Wilkins!
Bada bing, bada boom. We are back here in the studio once again. By studio, I'm in Utah, Josh is in Pennsylvania, but hey, the miracles of technology, here we are.
Here we are. We are in the virtual studio, and thank goodness we're still able to get together and do this, so we're excited to bring you this one today.
This is a topic, Josh, that when we first started this podcast a few years ago, it was on our list of topics that we really liked.
Mm-hmm.
The one that, constantly kind of got lost in the shuffle. I'm really excited to finally be talking about this.
Yeah, no, I when you brought it up last week, I started to look at some highlights again, look at some numbers, and we're the word's going to come up a couple of times, but underrated just kept flashing through my mind, and we're going to talk about that. So this will be a good one.
It absolutely is, and when we break down the life and times of a specific NBA player like this, when we begin to really dive deep, go beyond the box scores, go beyond, what lies on the surface, there's always something new to be found. And in this case, we found quite a bit of interesting facts that all add up to one overall conclusion. Dominique Wilkins does not get enough respect. Never did, still doesn't. This is one of the NBA players that I would love to have on my team in any era, and frankly, someone who needs to be brought up more in conversation with NBA fans.
I could have put it better, and I think when the casual fan, no matter how familiar they are with NBA history, thinks of Dominique, they think of the human highlight reel, right? The high flying dunker, the guy who, if he played in 2025, would go viral probably just about twice a week in today's league. But the more you dig into it, this guy was much more than a dunker. This guy could straight up put the ball in the basket. And at the end of the day, that's what the game's all about. Being one of the most dynamic guys to put the ball in the basket. And there's a lot to Dominique. Fascinating career. But before we can get into the career of Dominique, I think we got to know where he came from, Cal.
We do. And for that, we take the NBA time machine all the way back to January of 1960. And of all places, Paris, France.
Paris, France. See, I did not know this. This is crazy.
So, Wilkins is American, son of American dad and American mother, who happened to be in the U.S. military, stationed at the time in Paris, France. So again, we go back to 1960. We have a actual baby boomer in the house in Dominique Wilkins. The parents are stationed in Paris, France, and Dominique is one of 7 children. Interestingly enough, one of his younger brothers also becomes an NBA player. Picture Giannis's little brother. Giannis's little brother was actually good at basketball.
Actually serviceable, got real minutes.
Gerald Wilkins, he actually spent
Gerald
years as a starter on playoff teams.
Good player.
But he's definitely not Dominique. And that's not taking anything away from him, because very, very, very few people are Dominique. where the family relocates back to America shortly before Dominique starts high school, ultimately settling in the small riverside community of Washington, North Carolina. Population today, around 9,000. And this is back in the 1970s. So it's here that the youngster would grow into the slender but muscular 6'8", high-flying figure that could seemingly do anything and everything on a basketball court. He leads his high school team to back-to-back state championships, and he claims the state's MVP award in both his junior and senior high school seasons. Now that's more than enough to capture the attention of college coaches all across the country into tiny little Washington, North Carolina. And as Neek, as he is lovingly called, prepared to embark on the next level of his career, the kid from North Carolina surprises a lot of people with his college choice. UNC is already UNC at this time. They're an institution. Right. They would win championships. But instead, Dominique takes his talents to Athens, Georgia, to play for the Bulldogs of UGA, under coach Hugh Dunham, beginning in the 79-80 season. And it's here at Georgia that Neek actually receives his most famous and enduring nickname, the human highlight film, or the human highlight reel. Take it away. So for Wilkins, this is a guy where gravity is indeed just a theory. The theory of gravity does not apply to Dominique Wilkins. As game in and game out, the high flyer would live, laugh, love above the rim. He's stuffing the stat sheet to the tune of 22 points and 8 rebounds per game over the course of his 3 years in the college ranks.
Not bad, not bad.
And that includes even leading the nation in scoring at 23.6 back in 81. So in this era, where most prospective NBA players still go to college all the way through their senior seasons, only the particularly exceptional prospects declared for the draft early.
Mm-hmm.
Wilkins definitely checked the box of exceptional. He leaves UGA after his junior year to enter the 1982 NBA draft.
That's a big deal.
It was a big deal. And when we look back at 1982's draft, it's not necessarily one of those landmark drafts that we saw later in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
In all, 7 players from that class make at least one All-Star game over the course of their careers. 4 would make an All-NBA team, and 3 of those individuals who would be drafted 1, 2, 3 in this top-heavy class, 2 of them would go on to find a place in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the Basketball Hall of Fame. So, despite leading the NCAA in scoring, Wilkins wasn't necessarily considered the jewel of the class. So in his 3 collegiate years, his teams never made the NCAA tournament. UGA fielded a good, but certainly not great, 58% winning percentage in those 3 years. And perhaps at the time, a lot of scouts began to think that Wilkins was a classic empty stat stuffer. So the honor of being the first name called from the podium was James Worthy. Now, he fares much more modest college averages of 16-6, but he happened to do 16-6 at UNC.
That's a difference. Tar Heel right there.
Difference. Yeah, a big difference, especially in UNC. Comes off a ridiculous 32-2 season.
Jeez,
winning a national championship over Georgetown, a team that was led by freshman sensation by the name of Patrick Ewing.
Yep.
Usually when teams, pass on a guy who ultimately makes the Hall of Fame, the decision is lamented and, something that they have to live down for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
But much like when Olajuwon goes number 1 over MJ, the hindsight consensus on drafting big game James Worthy over the human highlight film is generally, yeah, I can see it. Not a bad choice. And Worthy, of course, would go on to find himself in the Hall of Fame, win a few championships in Los Angeles. Fantastic, fantastic player.
Of course.
Does he deserve to be ahead of Dominique Wilkins? I'm going to argue no. despite everything he accomplished, I think Dominique's the best player, and we're going to talk about why as we go deep into his career. Pick number 2, the San Diego Clippers would have a vintage Clippers draft night, getting a very good player, Terry Cummings.
Yeah.
But a player far removed from that top tier of that next man up. And the next man up is Dominique Wilkins.
I gotta say, a player that, of course, doesn't even have his best seasons with the Clippers. I think he only plays a couple of years before people. I mean, people think of Terry Cummings as a Buck or a Spur, definitely not as a Clipper. 100%. So that is a typical Clipper pick right there.
100%. Yeah, it's not what you expect, and whether you remember him in San Antonio, Milwaukee, or the Clippers, you still don't remember him quite as fondly as the Nikazoid, Dominique Wilkins.
I love it.
So Wilkins would hear his name at number 3 and become the decade-plus face of the franchise for, you know the story, the one and only Utah Jazz. Wait, what? Yeah, so this is one of the great what-ifs in NBA history. He was drafted by this fledgling franchise out in the Mountain Time Zone, pre-Stockton, pre-Malone, and it was just not a match made in heaven, to say the least. Things start to get really bad in training camp when Wilkins finds out that Jazz GM/coach Frank Layden, rest in peace, wanted him to play power forward. Now, in an era where positions really mattered in basketball, power forwards would typically spend most of their time camped down in the low post, back to the basket. The slender-bodied Wilkins had his reservations about that. He would say, I was not going to play power forward. I was a small forward. Power forwards in them days was some big, physical, and I'm not going to say what else, but I didn't want to be no part of that. Can't blame him, right? I mean, muscular beard, muscular guy, but slender. Even by NBA
very much
standards,
so. Very much so.
So Wilkins is shipped off to Atlanta for $1 million cash, along with these classic names. We all know them, and by all, I mean nobody. Freeman Williams and John Drew.
Oh, of course.
Drew was decent. Drew was
a solid player.
Williams ended up playing, I think, was 15 games in Utah.
Yikes.
So this ends up being remembered as one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. And instead of playing on a squad that was just a couple years away from drafting John Stockton and Karl Malone, Dominique returns home to the Peach State to begin his professional basketball career. Interestingly, Wilkins would later reminisce on what could have been. He would say, playing with Stockton and Malone, we probably could have won a few championships. Not probably, we would have. But again, things happen in life for a reason, and you gotta take the cards. You gotta take what cards are dealt. But coming to Atlanta was a blessing for me, and I've never left. Well, few could have known or predicted just how much of a blessing it would be for both Dominique and for the city of Atlanta. And very few could have predicted that the day would come when a statue would stand in the entrance of the Atlanta Hawks home arena. But before we go too deep into it, Josh, let's talk about those first formative years in Atlanta and how they looked for Dominique.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork for how he earned that statue. Top 3 pick. A lot of eyes are on Dominique on how he's going to perform in his rookie campaign naturally, and I can say without a doubt, Neek was a stud right from the get go. He was built for the NBA game. So we jump to October 29th, 1982. He's now settled into Atlanta after that small quick stint in Salt Lake City, and he makes his NBA debut versus the Detroit Pistons. He does pretty well. 23 points, 65% shooting, tossing 12 rebounds, tossing 3 steals. That's not bad for an NBA debut. It's hyper efficient, and it's a big time announcement that he is here to play some ball. Yeah. And to reinforce that, one day later, the Hawks are going to host the Boston Celtics in Atlanta for their home opener, and the rising star, Dominique, decides to acknowledge his rival before the game, someone by the name of Larry Bird, and he ends up getting this pretty unforgettable encounter. Dominique would later tell the Players Tribune, I remember the first time that I played against Bird. I go to shake his hand. I'm a rookie playing against the Boston Celtics in the Boston Garden. And Larry put both hands behind his back. He would not shake my hand. I said, okay, we're just getting into the game. First play of the game, he said, you don't even belong in the league, Holmes, and shoots a three. I wasn't even mad about the three, but I did say, did this SOB just call me Holmes? So he came back, he did it again, and I'm pissed. So the next time I jump up, I throw it down on the man, and he fouls me. And he says, Rook, I like you. You got heart, but I'm still getting 30 on your ass.
That is vintage trash talking from one of the best
it.
trash talkers in NBA history. Love it.
I love it. And hey, you got to give Nick credit for rising to the occasion, because in that game, his second game of his career against those Celtics, 22 points, 46% shooting. And then he follows that game up with his first career 30-point performance just 3 games into his young NBA career. He hangs 30 plus on the Washington Bullets. And you blink, fast forward to the end of this 82-83 season, the Hawks are in the playoffs where they would actually match up with the Celtics again. They lose again at this time. Pre-1984, the first round is actually a best of 3. It's a mini series at this point in time, which is why you see some interesting results back in the 70s and early 80s. In fact, there's a year where the Lakers get knocked out in the first round because of this best of 3. But it's in that series where the rookie officially earns Larry's, I'll call it reluctant respect, where Larry would even say, as an acrobat, Dominique is even more interesting in many ways than Michael Jordan. While Michael takes the ball straight to the basket, Dominique loves to spin. He comes right at you and then does a 360-degree spin right off the dribble. It's a totally different type of basketball than anything I've seen before from Larry Legend himself. Pretty cool. Obviously not calling him a better player than Michael, but that kind of athlete, I put him in that same tier, right?
Yeah, that's high praise, you know. I mean, especially at this point in Dominique's career. He's a young buck. To get that kind of praise from Larry Legend, you do not take that lightly.
Not at all. The growth is exponential for Nick. By year 2, we're up to 22 points per game. Year 3, we're over 27 points per game. Clear franchise cornerstone. He even wins the slam dunk contest this year in 1985. But the Hawks take a step back. They missed the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. And this takes us to 85-86. This is Dominique's 4th year in the league. And it's his breakout year into true superstardom. And he shows Atlanta why he was indeed worth investing in. He explodes for 30.3 points per game in 1986. He wins the scoring title. And he's not only selected to his first All-Star game, but he makes the All-NBA first team, and he finishes second in MVP voting. And if you think of 1986, you think of the Celtics, you think of peak Larry Bird. That's the league that Dominique Wilkins finishes second in MVP voting, which to me, I think is incredibly impressive.
No, you take that any day of the week. Larry gets 73 out of the 78 votes. The last 5 first place votes, though, Dominique.
That's crazy. That's it. There you go. That's impressive. And it's deserved. I mean, again, you look at the scoring, the Hawks win 50 games, and they win their first playoff series since 1979. And I want to talk about that here in a second. But this is the first time that he really establishes himself no longer as this darling, fun young player. We like to call a lot of guys in today's NBA, oh, that's a fun player. Oh, I really like that guy. This is the year where he's like, I'm in the league's elite. And this starts an annual All-Star streak for Nick that would last until 1994. He's going to make 9 straight All-Star games and won't stop making All-Star games until he's 34 years old. And you know, in this 1986 season, in this first round, Atlanta is going to match up with the Pistons. This is pre-Bad Boys breakout. The Pistons are a solid team, but they're not the world beaters of the later half of this decade. And believe it or not, it's a high-scoring first-round series. The Hawks average 22 points per game in this first-round series against the Pistons. 122 points per game. Calvin actually sent me this awesome article. I'm glad he did. It's called "Dominique Had Himself a Picnic." I gotta say, fantastic title for a cover article for Sports Illustrated. If you guys have access to the SI Vault, I'd recommend going back and reading it. But I'll summarize it here from Jack McCullum. But it talks about how Dominique, again, known to most fans pre this season as just that guy who dunks, finally shows that he has something else to prove. Because in Game 1, puts up a solid 28 points, Hawks win. But in Game 2, he detonates. We're talking 50 points on no dunks, 50 burger, and he doesn't even touch the rim of the basket. Shoots
Wow.
19 for 28 from the field, 12 of 15 from the free throw line. Not a single jam, just silky jumpers, fadeaways, post-ups, pure offensive polish. And it's a pretty funny contrast because just hours before that game, Dominique's sitting at home with his toddler. Her name's Aisha. And he asks her to say dunk. And, being a toddler, she says done, doesn't fully say it. And then when he tries to get her to say pass, crickets. Not in the family vocabulary. No pass. We always made fun of Kobe growing up in the 2000s, 2010s. Kobe's like, pass, dunk. What are you talking? Just pass me the ball. This is Dominique. He's like, pass, not in the family vocabulary. But it's funny because it shows you where Nick was coming from. Dunking was the brand, but now it was time for something a little bit more. And he would say that this was the season that he wanted to prove himself as a total player. And it bothered him that people thought that all he could do was dunk. And he's like, I proved that now. And that 50-point masterpiece wasn't just one of his best games, but again, it helps Atlanta knock out Detroit in the first round. They win their first series since the late 70s. And you have kind of a fun roster here. You got Kevin Willis, or you got Randy Whitman, you got John Kontak, and off the bench, you got Spud Webb, who, by the way, in this 50-point game of Neek, Spud Webb has 19 points, 18 assists, and 7 rebounds. Spud Webb, was it 5'6"? I'm going to double check the height on him.
Did you say 7 rebounds for Spud Webb?
Yep. If you're the guy who let Spud Webb pull
most guys getting 20 rebounds. I mean, my goodness.
I mean, I just think of my wife's 5'5", 5'6", and I just think if we're playing basketball and she's grabbing rebounds on me, oh man, you're gonna have a talking from your coach. But Coach Mike Fratello sums it up perfectly. He says Neek and the other guys were just riding the same train, and the Hawks are young, they're fearless, they're playing as one. And although they lose, this can be a familiar theme. They lose to the Birds Celtics in the second round. They announced to the world that they were here to stay because in 1987, they win an incredible 57 games. Neek averages 29 a game, finishes top 5 in MVP voting. Then we jump to 1988, near carbon copy, 31 points a game for Wilkins, another all-NBA caliber year, and once again finishing high on MVP ballots. He's more popular than ever, especially after having just gone head-to-head versus MJ in one of the most well-known and iconic slam dunk contests of all time. But there's these playoff struggles, right? They run into Boston, they run into Detroit, then they run into Boston again. And this all culminates in this signature rivalry with Larry Bird, as we're now in the 1988 playoffs, and it's Game 7 of the 88 Eastern Conference semis. And this is the closest that the Hawks ever got to truly breaking through and making a deep playoff run. And this is, we're a year removed from what would be Larry Bird's last NBA Finals appearance. Even though people didn't know it at the time, it was clear that the Celtics were on the other side of the hill as a dynastic team, whereas the Hawks were getting better year after year, getting closer and closer. So it culminates in this Game 7 trip to the conference finals on the line. And it's this thrilling bucket for bucket fourth quarter that Boston wins 118-116. And in this game, Dominique has 47 points, while Bird has 34 of his own, 20 of those 34 coming in the fourth quarter. And Wilkins remembers this game as the basket was like a well. I couldn't miss, he couldn't miss, and it went down to the last shot of the game. Who's going to make the last shot? And he says, that's the single greatest game I've ever played in or seen played. It was just two guys who just did not want to lose. And it's an awesome game. If you haven't seen the highlights for that game, you got it. That's some quintessential NBA history hoops right there. And this takes us now to, before we kind of wrap up this first part of his career, where, now there's this tension, right? There's this style versus substance tension discourse around the Hawks. People, they're seeing that he's a little more than just a dunker. He's a top 10 scorer year in, year out, if not higher than that. And he's remarkably steady. From 85 to 92, he's between 26 to 31 points per game. The Hawks have won 50-plus games 4 times in a row. But again, the narrative is here. He's a spectacular scorer, but his teams aren't contending for titles in the truest sense. Like, he's their closer, but the Hawks, despite having a pretty solid roster around him, never have that second superstar to alleviate his burden. And that takes us to 1990, where he's now 30 years old. He's still at his peak physically. He wins another slam dunk title, for heaven's sake, in 1990 between his iconic power windmill. But the Hawks are slipping. They fall to 500. The bad boy Pistons are here. Something's brewing in Chicago. Calvin, what is this perception that Dominique can't individually carry a team to the finals? What's happening now at this point in his career?
It's not looking good for his legacy. And to be fair, they're saying the same thing about Michael Jordan at this point.
It's true. That's a good point.
Great player who can't take his team the final step. But we know perfectly well that MJ has the benefit of Pippen, a top 50 player, eventually joining him side by side. Dominique doesn't get that benefit. In fact, Dominique has to take things into his own hands and kind of develop and expand his game, and he does just that. Going into the 90s, as things are beginning to change in the landscape of the NBA, like you said, the Boston dynasty is fading. Even the Los Angeles dynasty is fading. It's anyone's league. Neeks begins to make the unusual but wise choice to embrace a change in his game and begins to add a three-point shot to his bag.
I love it.
So by the time the 91 season rolls around, Wilkins attempted 250 shots from downtown, the 10th highest volume in the league that year.
Wow. Okay.
Connects on a respectable 34% of them.
I would imagine for the era, that's probably on the higher end, especially considering the volume.
Yeah. And to go from a guy who didn't shoot threes at all his first years in the league, as most people didn't, it's really a change in the game. A good kind of modern day example, I would look at Blake Griffin and DeMarcus Cousins as guys who out of nowhere added 3-point shots to their bag. So with this new tool in his tool belt, he averages a typical workman 26, and he also averages a career high 9 rebounds per game. All this en route to his 6th straight All-Star game and 5th All-NBA team placement. But like we said, Atlanta not giving him any help. In fact, for Atlanta, it's going to be more of the same disappointing results into the 90s. Despite convincing the aged but still future Hall of Famer Sidney Moncrief to come out of retirement, along with Doc Rivers at point, the Hawks managed to only improve 2 games over the previous year's 500 regular season, finishing with 43 wins, and a first-round matchup has a massive underdog against the Pistons. Now, the Hawks, rather surprisingly, pushed this series to a decisive Game 5, but in Game 5, they are actually thoroughly humiliated in the Palace of Auburn Hills with a 113-81 beatdown to send Atlanta home once again empty-handed. And of course, this is the era where MJ finally gets over the hump and starts not only reaching the finals, but bringing home Larry O'Brien trophies. Meanwhile, 91-92 Hawks once again barely fluttered above 500 for the first half of the season, and despite Wilkins providing his best scoring efforts in the last 5 years with 28 a game. So around the All-Star break, things are already looking bleak. With just over a week to go until the All-Star break, the unthinkable happens. On the very day Wilkins is informed that he made his 7th straight All-Star game, and sitting just 25 points shy of entering the 20,000 club, in the second quarter, on a non-contact pivot, Wilkins comes up, grabbing his leg, hobbles, and quickly collapses in pain. He ultimately has to be carried off the floor. He had ruptured his Achilles, arguably the most dreaded injury in any sport, right up there with the dreaded ACL rip tear. At this point, it's a devastating injury to a 32-year-old, and it leaves many questioning if his playing days are done. Atlanta ultimately staggers to a 37-45 record, and that really, with Atlanta struggling, does little to calm the fears of NBA commentators that Wilkins is up. But Dominique himself, that fear never came. "I'll be back," Wilkins said immediately after the game. "When I heard it pop, I knew what it was. First thing on my mind was my season's over, and I gotta start thinking about next year." Well, that's a winning mindset, Josh, and
Absolutely.
With that mindset, he's able to do something that would be impressive even by today's standards, and that was just ridiculous by the standards of the early 90s. He makes it back in time for next year.
That's crazy. Especially at his age, too. I mean, early 30s. Wow.
Against all odds, I mean, this is what he does. I mean, he would tell Sports Illustrated, once again, the great Jack McCullum relating the story. McCullum would write that Wilkins really went to work 5 times a week, starting just days after surgery to repair the tendon. He reported to the Georgia Sports Institute in suburban Atlanta for 90-minute workouts to keep the rest of his body in condition. When the cast came off in March, the workouts intensified. To strengthen his right leg, he lifted weights, rode a stationary bike, and exercised in a swimming pool. In March, he began walking, and finally, jogging as much as 4 miles at a time, a distance that he himself had only ever previously covered by car. So, if there's a will, there's a way, and Dominique Wilkins has an eye on the wheel. In the following season, not only did Nick return, he plays in 71 games, and he averages 30 points per game. He finishes 5th in MVP voting, 2nd in scoring behind MJ, and most importantly, led by the Atlanta Hawks with no supporting cast really to speak of.
No.
He takes them back to the playoff.
That's incredible. I mean, if you just sit there, I'm just sitting here just scanning through his basketball reference, and if you didn't have that context, his numbers, I mean, it doesn't look any different than the previous year. I mean, the efficiency is about the same. The scoring spikes. It's his highest scoring season since the mid late 80s when he's racking up all NBA appearances. It's a vintage season, but with the context of coming off an Achilles injury at age 33. That's incredible. And I'm seeing 38% from 3 on 4.5 attempts. I mean, can I say it? He's better than ever. He's better than ever.
Better than ever. And man, how about his decision to add a 3-point shot to his game in 90, not knowing what would happen.
Right.
That became a pivotal aspect of his game.
Incredible.
I mean, the long short version of it, the human highlight film, is back. And although the high-flying dunks were perhaps now much more muted, all that working on a 3-point shot is a blessing. Like you said, essentially 5 attempts a game in an era where that was pretty high volume.
Absolutely.
Making a more than respectable 38% of them. Fantastic. We're going into 93. Bob Reese is out as coach, and Atlanta brings in the legendary Lenny Wilkins. By the way, no relation. Ironically enough, Lenny had just come from coaching Dominique's brother, so a lot of Wilkins connections, but none by blood. But again, with a supporting cast that lacked a co-star, they still did really well because we're talking about 5 other players besides Dominique who averaged between 10 and 19 points a game. Getting it done the team way. This leads the Hawks eventually to a 57-win season, which would have been Dominique's highest win total of his career, tying those late 80s seasons, except he wasn't part of it when it was all said and done. So Atlanta enters the All-Star break with the best record in the East. Dominique showing no signs of slowing, despite being in his 12th season and 2nd season post-injury. But Atlanta has a problem. They don't have money. And Dominique is about to be a free agent. They do not have the money that they're going to need to re-sign him in the offseason, and they don't want to lose him for nothing. So a drastic step has to be taken. On February 25th, 1994, the Hawks agreed with the Los Angeles Clippers on a trade that sends the human highlight film to LA in exchange for basically Danny Manning. Coach Lenny Wilkins would claim that Manning was a better fit for the team to make a deep playoff run. If you believe that, I have some oceanside property in Nebraska that I'd love to sell for you at a great price.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to press X to doubt there.
The Clippers were essentially already out of the playoff contention with still 25 games to play. And the trade was the first time, Josh, and to this date, the only time that a team in first place after the All-Star break trades their leading scorer.
That's unbelievable.
To his credit, in those 25 remaining games, Dominique does what Dominique stuff, only for New Jersey. He averages 29 and 7. But the Clippers are going nowhere. The soon-to-be 35-year-old is set to be a free agent. Despite his age, he's already demonstrated that he can still be that guy. Potentially even a number 1 scoring option on a playoff team, at worst case, a number 2 on a playoff team, even here in the twilight of his career. But if it has a free agent, and he even understands that there's probably just few precious years left on the old body, Nika's ready for his next chapter. Josh, where does this next chapter take him?
This next chapter takes him to an unlikely destination. I got to quickly say that the biggest bummer about that 94 Hawks team is that if anyone knows anything about the NBA in 1994, Michael Jordan's nowhere to be seen. So if there was ever a year where he could have maybe at least made the finals, I mean, because the Hawks are the 1 seed, they lose in the second round. It's a bummer all around, and it's clear that the Hawks missed some of that postseason scoring juice. Nevertheless, just the worst possible time for them to part ways. But this leads us, to this interesting post-Clippers, post-Hawks offseason where after years of trading jumpers and body blows with the Celtics, Dominique clads himself in green and white. Ooh. And it's a jarring image. I'm sure maybe you've come across an image of Dominique in a Celtics jersey online before on social media, and it looks photoshopped, right? We see that all the time nowadays, where there's the Lakers are in every trade rumor, so you're going to see Paul George photoshopped in a Lakers jersey. You're going to see that player photoshopped and whatever. It looks like one of those, but this is 1994 we're talking about. No Photoshop involved. It is Dominique who, in the fall of 1994, long after Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish have waved goodbye, the dynasty is dissolved. The banners are hanging heavy over a franchise that is now searching for relevance. If you want a deeper dive, we actually did a full-length episode talking about these dreary Celtic years in the 1990s and early 2000s. And the Celtics take a stab at Dominique Wilkins. Clearly not the same player that he was before, but still putting the ball in the basket. But you can't expect an aging star to carry your franchise every single year. Unfortunately, that's what people expected. The pressure came pretty quick, and it was unforgiving. Dominique arrives in a Celtics locker room that was young. The roster was inconsistent. It was lacking identity. I'm not going to lie. It was bad. It was very bad. He was expected to kind of anchor that chaos. But his game and his personality ultimately never fully meshed with what Boston needed at that time or what the fans wanted. In fact, Larry Bird, who was involved with the front office at this time, said the Celtics were lucky because by then, the fans had actually turned against Wilkins. I felt sorry for him, honestly. He's not a bad guy at all. He just got set up to be some kind of franchise savior, and that was never going to happen. But just because the expectations are too high and not appropriate for the kind of player that he was at that time doesn't mean that you can't be productive, because at 35 years old, he leads the Celtics in scoring. Now, it's a big drop off. The volume is lower. He's not quite the same player. He is clearly starting to slow down. At some point, you got to drop off, right? But he still averages 18 and 5 as the first post-Bird era star with some name value. And he plays in 77 of the 82 games. And despite Boston winning just 35 games, they make the playoffs. Behind an ugly the good old Eastern 35 and 47 got them in the playoffs this year. And I mean, I can't fault Wilkins, because you look at the roster, it's D Brown, it's Dino Raja, it's Sherman Douglas, and it's Eric Montross. And even as a diehard Celtics fan, I don't have any of their rookie cards. I don't have any of their jerseys. I'm not having conversations about Eric Montross over the dinner table. Maybe I should, but they get throttled by the Magic in the first round. And in that first round, you still can't fault Dominique. He averages a double-double of 19 points and 11 rebounds. He leads the Celtics in scoring. And in fact, it's Dominique Wilkins that has the honor of scoring the final points at the old Boston Garden before they moved to the Fleet Center.
Wow, I did not know that.
So the guy who puts the final period on the most important chapter of history for the most important franchise is Dominique Wilkins.
Now that's something that you can't take away.
It's crazy. And this brings us to a huge plot twist, because you'd think he'd come back for the Celtics, continue to cash in on his contract, but he goes to Europe. August 1995, Pavlos and Thanasis Yiannakopoulos. I looked at the pronunciation because I did not want to butcher that. Presidents of Panathinaikos Basketball Club asked themselves who is the best available player worldwide right now, and Dominique Wilkins was the answer. And after that well-known phrase of Pavlos, who said, "Bring him yesterday, not now, yesterday," Dominique signs a contract with Panathinaikos of the Greek League, a 2-year, $7 million contract, which at the time was the richest deal for a professional basketball player outside of the NBA. They buy him out of his Boston contract. So Dominique signs with them, and the reception was nothing short of electric. 5,000 fans greet him at Athens Airport on September 1st, 1995, and that 5,000 number spikes up to 13,000 at his first practice, just signaling how wildly he was embraced overseas. And after a little bit of a sluggish start and some friction with head coach Bozidar Maljkovic, Wilkins adapts and, dare I say, even thrives in the European game at 36 years old. He averages 20 points and 7 rebounds in just 33 minutes per game. And I'll be damned if he helps them win the EuroLeague title in 1996.
Wow. How about that? The kid who played college ball in Athens, Georgia, plays professionally in Athens. Yeah.
It's crazy. And I will say he particularly excels in some pretty important EuroLeague games. There's the deciding Game 3 of the best-of-3 quarterfinals versus Treviso. He drops 26 and 7. And he's named Final Four MVP after dropping 35 and 8 in the semifinal against CSKA. A later recount actually amplifies just how intense the hysteria was over Greek basketball. Wilkins says he was scared to death when he returned to the airport after their championship run, and the crowd had reportedly swelled to 250,000 people.
Wow.
Might be a little inflated, but it's safe to say that it was a frenzy for Wilkins in Panathinaikos in 1996. They would later play in the Greek Cup, where they would win the title, and he would win Cup final MVP honors. But not all was smooth sailing. Wilkins only played one season with Panathinaikos. It ends contentiously as the team is now playing in the Greek League. And though he plays through the Greek League finals, he does not suit up for what would be the deciding Game 5, citing an injury. And this was later a claim that was disputed by the basketball club. And subsequently, the organization would attempt to prematurely terminate his contract. And despite the unceremonious ending with the basketball club, he's beloved in Greece to this day. He's one of the first big NBA stars to play overseas at the tail end of his career. So he's very much a pioneer in that sense of the word. So you think, okay, that's got to be the final bow on Wilkins' professional basketball career. But Neek comes back to the NBA. He signs with San Antonio, age 37. He's like, you know what? Let's go with David Robinson. We'll play with David Robinson. But what happens is we all know that Tim Duncan was drafted after the season, and that's because David Robinson gets hurt. The Spurs win 20 games. So you know what Dominique says? He's like, you know what? I'm just going to lead the Spurs in scoring at age 37. 18.2 points per game. And they're not a good team. You can't expect the 37-year-old Dominique to carry you to a playoff appearance in the Western Conference, no less. But he led the team in scoring, 18 points per game.
And spent the majority of the year coming off the bench and still leads the team in scoring.
Incredibly impressive. And I got to say, again, he plays in 63 of the 82 games, misses a handful of games there, but for the most part, plays most of that year. Now, I'll briefly say he then goes back overseas, this time for the Italian League, pours in 18 points per game in the FIBA EuroLeague for Fortitude Bologna, before coming back for one more NBA cameo. And this time, he's truly done. We can say he's washed at this point. He's 39 years old. He's playing for the Orlando Magic alongside his brother, Gerald Wilkins, actually. And the human highlight reel at this point only plays in a handful of games for the Magic. He's a far cry from the dynamic scorer of yesteryear. And I got to say, he was a scorer to the end. Even when he slowed down, he could still fill it up from anywhere. He was a pioneer overseas. His Greek stint really legitimized the idea that NBA stars could go abroad and still be celebrated and respected. And we see players today who have gone on to extend their playing careers by playing overseas. We see Dwight Howard did it. J.R. Smith played overseas. P.J. Tucker played overseas. One of our favorite players of all time, Jimmer Fredette, played overseas and was a phenom in China. And then on top of that, you have the longevity. 39 years old and still playing NBA minutes, especially crazy considering that Achilles tear years earlier. So, LeBron pouring it in at 40 years old. I got to give a shout out to Dominique putting buckets in the NBA 36, 37, 38 years old. And, because he never got that ring, Calvin, people understate how strong his Twilight was. I got to say it.
They do. And they understate him on a lot of things, which brings us back to the full circle.
Mm-hmm.
The title of this episode, Mr. 51. What happened in 1996 when the NBA unveiled the top 50 players of all time? What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened, Josh. And this is no way, canon, but it is my theory. People were upset that he left to play in Greece. Namely, general managers who thought it would set a terrible precedent for future player negotiations, and NBA media who don't want to stay up at 2 a.m. to find out what happened in the EuroLeague. That made up 2 out of the 3 main voting blocks for the top 50 team. The final voting block were former players, and these are the people who absolutely 100% recognized that Dominique deserved to be on the top 50 team. One of my favorite quotes comes from Danny Ainge. He said, Dominique, he's not one of the 50 greatest. In my opinion, he's one of the 25 greatest. Dominique recalls that the biggest compliments you can get, he would say, I think Larry Bird and Magic Johnson come into my defense saying, how is this guy not 50 greatest? To me, that's more validation than I need when guys like that come to my defense.
Enough said. Enough said.
Now, that doesn't mean he wasn't salty. Now, he finally comes full circle in 2021. He makes the All-NBA 75-15. Wilkins would say at that time, referring to the 50 team, that was a joke. That was a joke because at that time, I was the 7th all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Technically, he was 8th, but he finished 7th. So I'm like, this is Dominique's words. So I'm like, what?
Valid reaction.
Comes full circle. I'm top 75. And then you see some of the rankings and see where I'm ranked now. I'm often ranked 20, 35. So I'm like, well, how did I miss top 50? But it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm part of the top 75 greatest players to ever play. So for me, I'm cool with that.
Love that.
Well, Josh, between the top 50 team and the top 75 team, 22 players added to the top 75 team who either played all or most of their career after the top 50 was announced, leaving just 3 spots for snubs. Those spots went to Reggie Miller, deserved, Bob McAdoo, very deserved, and the most deserving of all, Mr. 51 himself, Dominique Wilkins, finally getting the respect that he was long overdue for 25 years ago. And that's the story of the human highlight film in the flesh, Dominique Wilkins. What a story it is to tell, Josh. What a fun one this has been.
What a treat. Yeah, one of my favorite players ever, genuinely. So this is a blast to go back and, I mean, to put a bow on that with how we ended that. I mean, it's deserved. This is a guy who deserves the spotlight shined on him for the. I mean, I say this all the time in our episodes when we're going through NBA time. When we're going in our NBA time machine, if you can't tell the history of the NBA without mentioning this player, then that says everything about the impact that they had. And Dominique Nikazoid, as Calvin said earlier, you can't tell the history of the NBA without talking about Dominique Wilkins, Mr. 51.
Well, we've enjoyed this. We hope that you've enjoyed listening as much as we have enjoyed bringing this to you. If you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, wherever and however you found us, so do us a favor, click that subscribe button, click that like button, share us on your social media if you feel so inclined. Whatever you do, or however you do it, we enjoy bringing this to you, and we hope to bring you a lot more. So thank you for joining us here on Once Upon a Driven.